This episode has bright flashing colors that may cause seizures in people with epilepsy. If you are prone to such a condition, I would recommend that you not watch this video. You know, we all make mistakes when we're young and stupid. So a couple of years back, I made a list of the top 10 things that I'll never review. I decided to make that list because I kept getting requests for certain things that I wasn't really interested in talking about. For example, I kept getting requests for Over the Garden Wall, which I didn't want to talk about because everyone else was. I didn't want to talk about Clarence because its creator had gone through a massive controversy. And I assumed that I would, never change my mind about anything. Some of my stances in that video I still stand by, and some of them I've softened on. Number 1 on that list was the Powerpuff Girls episode, See Me, Feel Me, Know Me. A lot of people wanted me to review it, and I was even all up and ready to go with it, even slating it to be one of the episodes in like Season 2 or Season 3. But as I announced it, a lot of people didn't want me to review it, stating that it was a good episode. And to avoid any sort of backlash, I decided that I would just swear off of talking about it. I want to state something ahead of time in this review. My videos are not here to just spout the popular opinions or to regurgitate what everyone else thinks. I am here to give my own takes on various pieces of media, and sometimes they may be the minority or the unpopular opinion. What determines whether or not I talk about something shouldn't have anything to do with what other people think, but whether or not I have something to say. And this is an episode that, good or bad, gives me a lot to talk about. So, after so long, what are my thoughts on this episode? Well, I do think that this is an animated atrocity. I think that there are more things about this episode that I don't like than I do. But a lot of people ask me if I have a guilty pleasure in terms of animation. Something that I know is bad, but I do like on some level. And I think this episode is definitely in that realm. It's one of the few things that I can legitimately point to. I know that this episode is terrible, but I can enjoy it in spite of that. See Me, Feel Me, Know Me is a 22-minute episode of the original Powerpuff Girls. It's not just a musical episode, but it's a rock opera in the same vein as things like Jesus Christ Superstar and Tommy. What's impressive about it is that there is singing all the way through. Almost none of the dialogue is directly spoken. That goes above and beyond an episode that has a song or even several songs within it. I have seen this kind of thing before. Kids Next Door had an episode like this, as did Dexter's Lab, but I have never seen something like this for a 22-minute episode. It's also worth noting that this episode was banned back when it first aired, and there was a lot of speculation as to what the reason could be. The biggest theory was that there was a lot of communist imagery, and that's what got the episode pulled. That always seemed ridiculous to me. I mean, it's not far-fetched to see communist imagery in this episode. The people who follow the gnome within the episode are all forced to act as identically as possible. The Powerpuff Girls are asked to give up what makes them special, a common criticism of communism, and the robes that the characters end up wearing are red. I don't think that would have gotten an episode pulled in 2004, though. The Cold War had been over for more than a decade at that point, and it was not at all a touchy subject at the time. It was largely seen as dead during that time, more or less, because we had other things to worry about. Networks were too busy changing and banning things that resembled the Twin Towers to worry about yesterday's panic. My personal belief was the bright flashing lights within the episode. That seems the most likely scenario as to why it was pulled. At one point in the episode, lights strove from bright white to bright red, which is almost exactly what happened in Electric Soldier Porygon. I know that very few kids actually suffered from seizures during that incident in Japan, and it was more of an example of mass hysteria, but it seems like something that studios wouldn't want to take a risk on. According to the people who actually worked on the episode, though, it's because one of the background characters kind of resembled Jesus. Even though this is the word of God, so to speak, I do not believe that. Even the communism thing sounds more likely. That guy there was only there for a few seconds, and you really need to squint your eyes to see any Jesus there. I mean, I know that this episode is a reference to Jesus Christ Superstar, so people are more likely to squint, but it still seems far-fetched. How much leeway you give the bright flashing lights depends on you. It's supposed to be a big, flashy rock opera, and those are known to have rapidly flashing strobe lights, similar to the effects in the episode. But a person prone to seizures would have to go out of their way to attend such an event in real life. This being in a cartoon episode, it could happen here without them really even expecting it. Even if this wasn't the reason that got the episode pulled, I do think that the episode could have been a lot more careful with its bright flashing lights. Even as someone who doesn't suffer from seizures, certain scenes in this episode do make my eyes very uncomfortable. Speaking as someone who has seen the original Electric Soldier Porygon. So I get absolutely nothing out of the bright strobe lights, and personally I believe that the best way to enjoy this episode is by listening to it and not watching it because of them. And unfortunately, the listening experience gets off to a very rocky start as well. See Me, Feel Me, Know Me commits a cardinal musical sin, and that is not just starting out with a bad song, but the worst song of your entire piece. The episode opens up with the villains singing, and the villains cannot sing. Well, most of them anyway. Definitely not a fan of Mojo's singing. His vocal inflections do not lend themselves to singing, and neither does Fuzzy's accents. Princess legitimately sounds like she's whining sometimes, and him singing changes the tone of the song so fast it'll give you whiplash. The baby sings better than most of them, really. And no, the baby can't sing either. The problem here is that absolutely no one is harmonizing. I get that they want you to be able to identify who is singing each line, but it all clashes with itself, as if everyone was singing in a separate room. This reaches its apex towards the end where everyone is singing the same line. It should sound pleasant, but instead it just sounds like meaningless noise. Am I being a little bit harsh on this one song? Maybe, if it wasn't the first song of the episode. It's great that you want to do something ambitious for your show. I really do admire that. But if you're going to run a marathon, you have to make sure to remember that your shoes are tied before you trip through the starting gates. And that's what this song just did. It's not the worst song that I've ever heard in a cartoon, but it is bad. And it gives you an expectation for a painful time for the rest of the episode. When the Powerpuff Girls intervene, I think they make a smart move by letting the lyrics stay in the backseat for the music itself. The action is nicely on the beat, and I do want to say that this episode is very nicely choreographed. It's drawn and animated like a stage production. It gets incredibly frantic, and then the Powerpuff Girls get their asses handed to them. The girls are actually really good at singing this episode. Not the best that I've ever heard, but good. I mean, they've actually done this before in other episodes, so I'd expect them to be at least decent. We have a nice slow song, and from a story perspective, I actually kinda like this. This is new. The big sad we're defeated moment is usually reserved for the end of a story, the nadir, the lowest a hero can go, and it's usually just before they realize the strength within and finally rise out to beat the bad guy. It's refreshing to have this at the beginning, and I don't think they could have gotten away with that if this was something like a standalone rock opera, and not just an episode within another show, because we know the Powerpuff Girls, we know their fights. And we can still feel those same emotions, even if they get defeated in the first act. Then we get introduced to my favorite thing about this episode, the gnome himself. When I first watched this episode, I couldn't believe that they got Jack Black to do an episode of the Powerpuff Girls. That's because they didn't. That's actually Jess Harnell, and pardon me for not realizing it at first, because this is how I'm used to him singing.
Louisiana, Indianapolis, Indiana, and Columbus is the capital of Ohio.
Turns out this guy does more than just a really good Ringo Starr impression. He's very talented. The gnome's singing voice makes this episode for me. It is amazing. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It's technically great, but beyond that, he nails the inflections of the gnome perfectly, and every emotion from cunning to sympathetic. He says that it'll help bring peace to Townsville, on one teeny tiny condition.
Hey, how about your life? Girls, you gotta give me your life!
That's a bit extreme, don't you think? Yeah, I'll make all the evil go away if you shoot yourself. I mean, that's obviously not what he means, but it was really a terrible choice of words. And lines like this are not helping.
Everything you stand for, everything that makes you who you are, your life. Girls, you gotta give me your life! All your superpowers, this is your final hour.
It legitimately makes it sound like he wants them to off themselves, or become his slave. But by give me your life, he means their superpowers, which is barely even referenced. There's literally one line about it. It should have been made more clear, rather than just asking the girls to give up their life over and over again. Their powers are not the same thing as their lives, not even to the girls themselves, and not even in this episode. There are other lyrical issues that do crop up here and there.
All your powers, you hear me, but I think we should, 'cause it is for good. I'm the leader, you hear me.
I hate that line. Yes, the theme song states that Blossom is the leader, but her being the leader is usually very incidental within the show. I can't remember her pointing it out while in the show, except for here. It just seems to be a little bit too arrogant of a character. So, the girls give up their powers, or their lives, or whatever to the gnome, and he gives us Speck some seizure-inducing spectacles. If you can muster the ability to watch it, it is some impressive animation. These moving backgrounds are something that I don't think that I see very often. They appear like CGI clouds, they're that well animated. But seriously, those strobe lights are painful, and they last a good long time, right smack in the middle of the episode. The next song is really nice. They got people who could actually sing, instead of relying on the VAs of the villains who didn't have much practice singing in their villain voices. The mayor does alright, but that's because it's Tom Kenny, and he's used to singing in strange voices. Okay, is there any reason that that guy there has pointy teeth? I know that the background characters in 90s cartoons weren't the best. They could often look very ridiculous, but he's like the only guy with pointy teeth, and it distracts me every time. Is he secretly evil or something? The gnome gets rid of the bad guys, and then he makes everyone's lives better. So better, they even sing a song about it. Now they end up thanking the gnome for the things that he had no fault over, like the sunshine, skies, clouds, and the summer breeze. I'm pointing this out because at this point, the episode's story falls apart completely. The story of this episode is what makes it an atrocity. It is a terrible story. It is true, all the things that the gnome is being thanked for is not his fault, literally, but it could be considered his fault metaphorically. You can't really enjoy things like butterflies or the summer breeze when villains are beating you senseless, now can you? It's not like the gnome didn't do anything. From what it seems like, everyone is happy, but the episode wants you to assume that the gnome has done nothing for these people whatsoever, and he's just being thanked for things he had no fault in. Then everyone joins the gnome cult. There's a principle we have in storytelling. It's the number one rule, actually. Show, don't tell. What this episode is going to do from here on out is going to keep telling us stuff and not showing us anything. We're just supposed to assume that the gnome is evil because he saved everyone's lives and people are worshipping him for saving their lives. In a normal episode, writing something like this is bad. But something that's supposed to be a big theatrical piece, this hurts so much more. The episode expects us to assume that the gnome is doing evil because he is doing the stuff that evil creatures do that aren't directly evil, like demanding people live in his name. But we never actually see the gnome do anything wrong on camera. He doesn't hurt anyone. Just the opposite, actually. If he didn't intervene, the villains would have won. It gets to the point where it feels like there are pieces of this story missing. Then we have a ridiculous song about freedom beef.
Do the people have to be freedom beef?
Everyone there is sacrificing their hopes and their dreams. Willingly, as far as I can tell. Neither the professor or the girls are wearing the robes that the gnome is asking people to wear. Seriously, I feel like a scene was just torn out of this episode completely. It's like it's a Jenga tower that's just about to fall over. Then, I don't even know what's going on in the rest of the episode. It just completely falls apart. The professor says that the girls have their powers back because there's evil in the world somewhere. Even if the gnome was evil, he still took the girls' powers away. Isn't that a thing for evil villains to do? Make deals with little hidden things in their contracts? If the gnome was good, he would honor his deal and the girls wouldn't have their powers back. If the gnome was evil, he would make up a false contract and the girls still wouldn't have their powers back. But no, the girls are just deciding that they have powers just because. This isn't even a Deus Ex Machina. A Deus Ex Machina is like when a hero is about to be eaten by a dragon, but the dragon has a heart attack. This is like when the hero is about to be eaten by the dragon, but then the writer decides that the dragon just isn't there anymore so the hero can get up and leave. The gnome didn't break his deal, and that's one of my main gripes with the story. The entire last act of this thing is just stupid. I will say that the song Freedom Beef is good. I could do without the ridiculous visuals though. Yeah, everywhere else things look well choreographed, and the imagery is well chosen, and it all looks beautiful. You know, like there was some time and planning that went into the episode. This scene looks like it was made because the people behind it couldn't think of anything, and they wanted to break for lunch. The next song is about opposites, and I don't even really know what they were going for. One of the lyrics is this.
Not us three you can't have back. Without the good.
Okay, but, what? There are things that are universally bad, and there are things that are universally good in the universe. Within the episode, though, the gnome seemed to realize what the girls are telling him. He got rid of both the villains and the girls' powers. He got rid of the bad and the good. Because you can't have the bad without the good, or the good without the bad. What the hell are you going on about? Also, watch out, there are more seizure-inducing visuals. It is a nice song, instrumentally, but the more you listen to it, the more frustrating it gets. But let's see what they really do know about opposites, considering this whole episode is apparently about the opposites now.
There's no dark without the light. There's no dim without the bright.
Incorrect. Dark is literally the absence of light. When there is no light, everything is dark. Darkness can only exist without light.
There's no warm without the cold. There's no weak without the bold.
I mean, I guess you wouldn't be able to subjectively feel warm without understanding cold, but it's still the same principle applying. Heat is an objective thing in the universe, and cold only exists where heat isn't.
There's no sun without the moon.
Okay, what the hell are you even talking about now? The moon had nothing to do with the sun's creation, and we'd be orbiting the sun with or without the moon.
There's no fork without the spoon.
I get that Buttercup is kind of the stupid one, but now you're just shouting out gibberish. There's no fork without the spoon. Yes. Oh, okay. The whole theme of this episode, I guess, is a yin-yang kind of thing. It's that nothing in the universe can exist without its opposite, but in that sense, this episode is its own antithesis. No one makes a deal with the Powerpuff Girls. It works out well for everyone. Then the Powerpuff Girls randomly decide that the gnome is evil and beat him up, getting their powers back randomly, because there's no good without the bad. Oh, I get it now. The girls need to act like massive assholes and beat someone up the episode portrays as innocent to get good into the world, because this story is stupid.
As I descend to the earth, and I view the universe above me, I realize that life evolves, revolves, and dissolves completely around the opposites. Therefore, I conclude that I cannot exist in my utopian mind.
I get the idea. I really do. A lot of people give promises of a world without pain and suffering if you follow along with their ideology. That's where the connections to communism tend to come from. And the message that this episode is trying to teach is a good one. People who try to present you with a utopian dream will often lead you astray, and they will force you to make sacrifices that you may not want to make. But that's not at all what this episode shows. It shows that utopian dream is working and everybody is happy following along with it. Like I said, this episode is its own antithesis. The gnome dies, and then we get a moment of silence. This would fit nice and dramatic. It is well directed. It would be absolutely perfect here if the story hadn't completely collapsed at this point. In my view, the story trumps almost everything, and good direction cannot save a broken story. They should have given it another rewrite in the conception phase. So we've got one final song. Everyone is trying to thank the Powerpuff Girls and worship them, but don't do that because individuality or something. At no point in this episode was anyone prevented from doing what they wanted to do, so I have no idea what individuality had to do with anything. Then this episode ends in the worst way possible.
Why can't we all get along?
Good question. I actually have no answer to that, but I think that you guys actually do have an answer to that question.
There's no joy without the sad. There's no good without the bad.
They even sing the song with the villains.
Why can't we all get along?
Yeah, why can't the heroes and the villains get along? But you can't have the good without the bad. You gave us the answer to why you can't get along. Why are you asking questions to which you already know the answers? This episode is a little hard to pin down, I have to say. The good things in this episode are fantastic. I kind of wish that Jess Harnell did his gnome voice, especially for songs, more often. This episode is definitely a visual spectacle in places, and if you completely ignore the story, it's almost a continually great listen through from beginning to end. The lyrics can be rough in some places, but the instrumentation is phenomenal. It isn't ever jarring, and it has a nice flow from piece to piece. The problem is that I can't ignore the story, and the story is bad. This episode is clearly style over substance, and that makes sense. Most things that are style over substance do fall into many people's guilty pleasures, or they end up having mixed opinions. The problem here is that most style over substance pieces don't end up contradicting itself as much as this one does. If you like it, I can see why though. If you don't like it, I can also see why, because depending on the day, I could be in either camp.